On the evening of January 19th, 1931, a telephone call was made to a chess club in Liverpool. The caller asked for a man named William Herbert Wallace. Wallace wasn't there. The message was taken by the club captain. The caller had left an address. He wanted Wallace to visit the following evening on a matter of business. Wallace turned up at the address the next night. It didn't exist. He came home to his house on Wolverton Street and found his wife Julia bludgeoned to death in the front parlour. The telephone call that had sent him across Liverpool on a wild goose chase had been made from a phone box 2 minutes' walk from his own front door. Someone had lured him away from his house and used the time to murder his wife. But who? This is Crime Archive. Tonight we are opening the file on the Wallace case, the murder that has baffled investigators, lawyers, and historians for nearly 100 years. William Herbert Wallace was 52 years old in January 1931. He was an insurance agent working for the Prudential Assurance Company, a quiet, methodical man who collected premiums from working-class clients across Liverpool. He played chess at the Liverpool Central Chess Club on Monday evenings. He was interested in science and philosophy. He was, by every account, deeply ordinary. His wife Julia was 69 years old. She was a gentle, cultured woman who played piano and gave music lessons from their home on Wolverton Street in the Anfield district of Liverpool. They had been married for nearly 20 years. People who knew them described a couple who were devoted to each other, quietly, undemonstratively, in the way of people who had built a life together over decades and no longer needed to announce it. On the evening of January 19th, 1931, William Wallace arrived at his chess club to find a message waiting for him. A man named Qualtrough had called. He wanted Wallace to visit him at 25 Menlove Gardens East the following evening on a matter of business, a new insurance policy, the message implied. Wallace noted the address and thought nothing more of it. On the evening of January 20th, Wallace set out across Liverpool to find 25 Menlove Gardens East. He asked a tram conductor for directions. He asked a constable on the street. He asked several residents in the Menlove Gardens area. Nobody could help him, because 25 Menlove Gardens East did not exist. There was a Menlove Gardens North, a Menlove Gardens West, a Menlove Gardens South, no East. Wallace spent approximately 45 minutes searching for an address that had never existed before, giving up and returning home. He arrived back at Wolverton Street at approximately 8:45 p.m. He tried the back door. It was bolted from the inside. He tried the front door. It opened. He went inside and found Julia. She was lying on the floor of the front parlour. She had been beaten to death. There was blood on the walls, on the furniture, on the floor. The killer had struck her at least 11 times with a blunt instrument that was never found. Here is the detail that immediately divided investigators. The back door was bolted from the inside. If the killer had entered through the back door and left the same way, they could not have bolted it behind them, which means either they left through the front door or they were let in by Julia herself and left through the front door after killing her. Julia Wallace was a cautious woman who did not open the door to strangers at night, which meant, according to the logic of the investigation, that she had opened the door to someone she knew. Someone she trusted enough to let into her home on a winter evening while her husband was out. The investigation moved quickly toward William Wallace. The logic was straightforward. He had an insurance policy on his wife's life. He had been away from the house during the time of the murder, conveniently summoned by a telephone call made to his chess club the previous evening. and the telephone call had been made from a box less than a quarter of a mile from his own front door. Had Wallace himself made the call, creating an alibi by sending himself across Liverpool while his wife was murdered by an accomplice, or while she was killed before he left? Wallace was arrested, tried, and convicted of murder in April 1931. He was sentenced to death. And then something extraordinary happened. The Court of Criminal Appeal overturned his conviction, not on a technicality, not on a procedural error. The appeal judges ruled that the verdict had been against the weight of evidence. William Wallace walked free. He was the first person in English legal history to have a murder conviction overturned by the Court of Criminal Appeal on those specific grounds. He returned to his job at the Prudential. He moved away from Wolverton Street. He wrote letters and diaries protesting his innocence with a quiet, methodical persistence that matched everything else known about him. He died 2 years later from a kidney condition he had been managing throughout the trial. He never stopped insisting he was innocent. And the question that his acquittal left open has never been answered. If William Wallace didn't kill Julia, who did? Over the decades since the Wallace case, one name has emerged more consistently than any other as an alternative suspect. A young man named Gordon Parry. Parry was a former colleague of Wallace's at the Prudential, a man who had been dismissed for financial irregularities and who knew the Wallaces well enough to have been admitted to the house by Julia without suspicion. Crucially, Parry knew Wallace's chess club routine. He knew Wallace would be there on Monday evenings. He had access to information that would have allowed him to make the Qualtrough call convincingly. And when detectives interviewed Parry during the original investigation, he provided an alibi. He claimed to have been visiting a friend that evening. Years later, that friend stated that Parry's alibi had been a lie. In the 1980s, a journalist named Roger Wilkes investigated the Wallace case for a BBC radio documentary. He tracked down Gordon Parry, by then an elderly man living in Wales. Wilkes confronted him with the evidence connecting him to the case. Parry's response, according to Wilkes, was extraordinary. He did not deny involvement. He did not engage with the evidence. He simply said, in a tone Wilkes described as deeply unsettling, that Wallace had known how to use a certain piece of equipment that could have cleaned up evidence from the crime scene. It was a statement that implied knowledge of the crime that an innocent man would have had no reason to possess. Parry died in 1980 before he could be questioned further, and whatever he knew died with him. Julia Wallace was 69 years old when she was beaten to death in her own front parlor on a January evening in 1931. She had been a piano teacher, a gentle and cultured woman who had spent 20 years building a quiet life with a quiet man in a quiet street in Liverpool. She had opened her door to someone that evening, someone she trusted, someone whose name, if it was ever known, has not been confirmed in nearly 100 years of investigation. William Wallace lived 2 more years after his acquittal, maintaining his innocence until the end. Gordon Parry lived until 1980, saying just enough to suggest he knew more than he ever admitted. And Julia Wallace, the woman at the center of all of it, lies in a Liverpool cemetery, her murder officially unsolved, her killer officially unidentified. The chess piece was moved, the address was invented, the back door was bolted from the inside, and somewhere in the gap between those 3 facts is the truth about what happened on Wolverton Street on the night of January 20th, 1931. We just haven't found it yet. Do you think William Wallace was guilty? Or did Gordon Parry get away with murder for nearly 50 years? Comment the word mysteries below and tell me what you think. I read every single one. And if cases like this pull you in, impossible alibis, mysterious phone calls, and questions that outlive the people who could have answered them, subscribe to Crime Archive, because we are only just getting started. Crime Archive. Some files never close.